Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Sunday Service, episode 13, brought to you by Cult of Conspiracy Podcast. And I'm also going to be a swap cast with Josh Monday Christian and Conspiracy Podcast, so I'll put it on both channels. I really appreciate you guys joining us today. We have two awesome guests today. One of them is I haven't met Ed yet. This is the first time meeting him, but I will do a solo show with Ed as well. But today, I just thought I'd bring him on. I mean, he's definitely awesome because he just comes on with Gary Wayne like on a on a whim. That's amazing, bro. Thank you so much. So, Ed is he's actually a truth seeker, a researcher, a Christian, and an amazing guy, man. I heard him on Sam Tripoli's podcast, Tinfoil Hat podcast, and also Heidi from Unfiltered Podcast actually introduced us. I really appreciate that, Heidi. And Ed Mabrie, how you doing
Yes,
today, brother?
I am good. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
And,
thank you
and
for
I'm very
coming
happy to be
on.
on with Gary. Yeah, big fan.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So yeah, and Gary needs no introduction, but we have Gary Wayne. I don't know if you guys could see the book. It's hard with this. Hold on, where does it? I can't remember. There's like a sweet spot if I stand up or something. I don't know. There we
There it
go.
is.
All right, the Genesis
There you
6
go.
conspiracy, and then Gary has another book out he'll tell you about. But Gary, how's it going, brother?
It's going well. Very happy to be here tonight and so much looking forward to the conversation and working hard on a lot of interviews these days. I've set book three aside for a little bit. I'll get back at that again early next year. Been updating my website. So I've done a few changes on the Genesis6conspiracy.com. So I have bundling page put on there now. So page three with the discounts as well for multiple books. And I have updated the media section there where I put 15 new videos up, not videos, but audios up where I work with a host who is a good Christian, but needs to have questions answered. So we go through each section of book one and book two. So 15 sections, cover the sort of overview of the sections and then really important questions that Christians, I think, need answered out of every section of the book so that people can get a good feel for the book. And this is book two if people aren't aware of it. And this one is specifically designed for Christians. And people were, I said I would never write a sequel to Gen 6 1, and I started on this other book. And the response from book one is we love the book, but we would like a book that's going to go with that kind of research very deep into the Bible and unlike other people have done it. So if you can do what you've done to other organizations and religions and do that with the Bible, and even though I go fairly deep in book one, this is a dive that is going to just absolutely light up the Old Testament for people. And I've moved all of the footnotes to actual footnotes on the same page because there's so much information there that you want to be able to read the information and the sourcing on it at the same time. I've been working on the audio for book two, so it's available in Kindle and it's also available in print. Book one is available in all three. Audio was approved by myself a couple of weeks ago on Amazon, Audible, and iTunes. Should be out day to day. I was hoping it was going to be out for Black Friday. Still not up yet from when I checked earlier or yesterday, but might be up today. We'll have to have a look at that. So for people who want it in any sort of format, it's there. And I would describe book two as book one on steroids for Christians. And if people like the work of Dr. Heiser, this is Dr. Heiser on steroids for Christians.
Awesome. Well, we need that, man. We definitely need that. We need the spiritual side explained. And we should I'll probably have Ed, I'll probably have you back on, dude, to do some of that, some of that explaining. And maybe you guys
Yeah,
can
that'd be
do
great.
maybe have another show together and we can knock out some supernatural stuff
Sure.
and the Christian side. So yeah, so guys, today I thought we'd go over some I know Sunday service we're usually going over the Bible. We're going to take a step back. We just ended in Exodus 4 and we'll take a step back from that real quick and since I when I have Gary on my show, Josh Monday Christian Conspiracy Podcast, or someone like Ed on, I just want to share it with this audience as well. So I want to make sure that both audiences get this information. But we'll be going over the banking families, like the Swiss bank. We'll probably hopefully we'll get a little bit into BlackRock and companies like that, you know. And I just kind of want to find out the bloodline. I know that Ed has some information that he can connect to the Bible, and Gary, as much as you can connect it to the Bible, that'd be awesome. Or prophecy, that'd be awesome. But yeah, let's get into it. You know, I'd like to know about these bloodlines and how they connect to the prophecy or anything in the biblical.
Hey, Josh, you mind to give just a quick intro to your
Yeah, yeah.
okay, yeah. Because I know it's the first time I've been on your show. Hopefully, well, it'll be the first of more than one time.
Oh, for
But
sure.
for those who don't know, Ed Mabrie, my website is faithbyreason.net, and and as the name implies, I don't believe there is a divorce between rational faith, the faith that God asks of us, and reason. I am and I'm a strategist and an analyst by career, and that's been what I've always done my entire career. And raised Christian, but I'm a questioner. I like to analyze things. I like to do deep analysis, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Some people will say that you shouldn't question God. I was brought up thinking, being taught that, but that's just not who I am. And I've gone on a journey through college and beyond with the idea that if God is real, which I believe He is, then his information about him should conform to logic and reason, which because he would have created it as he created all information. And that's a journey I've gone on. And that's how I approach the Bible and spirituality. And I created my site and my presence, my ministry for Christians who are like-minded, who are deep thinkers and analytical thinkers. And I do, very, very deep systematic analysis of everything. And I do it from the supernatural point of view, which I know, Gary's down with that as well, with the things with the Nephilim and topic that I absolutely love. And because I think if you don't take the supernatural worldview, a la Michael Heiser, who I was fortunate enough to have him introduce me to that world, then you're missing at minimum 80% of the Bible. And so that is my mission, is to help Christian thinkers understand why our faith actually makes sense using logic, reason, and systematic analysis. And happy to be here, and I'm happy to chime in on some of the things that we're going to talk about with Gary.
All right, amen. Thank you so much, Ed. I appreciate the introduction. I had some stuff here I could have read about, more into too. I should
Sure,
have brought up. So I appreciate that.
no problem.
So Gary, if you want to start, I think Ed will chime in when he'd like to, and we'll have a good show. Yeah.
Well, I guess the first question I would have before I start is where would we like to start on that? How, do we want to look at modern banking today and work backwards, or do we want to look at,
I wanted to get into like the families that are running, like that are running where they came from. Like if they
yeah,
do have some Nephilim connection, kind of go there and then make
sure.
our way forward if
Yep.
that's okay. Or you can, and honestly, however you want to work it, Gary, because you guys are
Yep.
the experts. I'm just the host.
Well, it'll go 1,000 different ways before we're done. So, I would look at, two very important groups, and as we look at modern banking and Western banking, and then how that sort of intersects around the world. So I would look at um, the royales that are in the Knights Templar group, that take Jerusalem in 1099 and sponsored by the Priory of Sion or the barons of the council, and then they separate that into a senior and junior order in 1118, and with Huda Paon being Grand Master of the junior order. And with that, you see tons, not tons, but I guess you could say tons because there's a lot of gold back there. There wasn't really cash, right? Gold and jewels and things like that. That was poured in and land gifts to the Knights Templar. And then they transitioned that to buy locations on all of the key roads and strategic locations throughout Europe on the way to the Middle East. And through those strategic locations, they invent modern banking. And so they do a couple of things that are unique. What they do is one is they do lower interest rates than typically what the money changers were doing and what was coming out of the Jewish money traders in Europe. And they created something that was really significant where it was you could deposit your money in Paris or London, wherever else, and then for the fee and the charge, and the commission to look after that, they would have that money waiting for you when you got to Jerusalem. so that the royals and the nobles could get there without being robbed, and they would have as much money as they would need while they were there. And they invented the modern check. They invented modern credit systems. They were the World Bank of that period of time. And so not only were they the most powerful army in the world at that time, they were also the most powerful banking system in the world at that time. And we owe pretty much all of that banking system that we have today to them. So when they were disbanded in 1307, those assets are in play, and there's protection that the Templars are going to um, put into play through several different avenues. And you've got royals and the Roman Church trying to get access to all of that cash and that power. And so the first thing that we need to sort of keep in mind with that event is that even though you have some of the treasure and knowledge going to Scotland, and the startup of the Rosicrucians and the Freemasonry through Robert the Bruce and the Sinclairs, most of the hard treasure from the main office of the Paris branch goes to Switzerland, to the Knights of St. John, who's a sister organization. And of course, they have the White Cross, and that White Cross is adopted by the Knights of St. John in the Saladin Wars, with the red background of blood. And they set up because they're a poor organization in 1040, but after the taking of Jerusalem, de Bouillon, he structurally sets them up as a corporation, so to speak, and gives them a significant amount of money. And they set up corporate headquarters, and they supply significant amount of mercenaries. They're actually the ones doing all of the guarding of the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, not really the Templars. They're there for different reasons, even though that's their ruse. And so this significant amount of money that's going to these mercenaries, to the Knights of St. John, they are going to return and dwell to. So it's a combination of ones who come from Switzerland and other ones that are going to go to Switzerland and live. And they set up their first sort of commandery in about 1113. And this is where, so it's well before 1307. And so you're going to have this money end up in Switzerland. And in 1180, a fellow by the name of Kuno von Bucke, of the Knights of St. John, he donates another significant amount of assets, and he starts to get a whole bunch of money in from the Royals to set up this new system that's going to be in. And by 1190, um, they're essentially in business and operating. And I would take modern banking back as we understand it after the Templars, even though this is before, as sort of the successor, starts in about 1190 in Switzerland. And then the assets from the Templars go there before they're disbanded. And even to this day in modern Swiss banking, you have as the major bank officers generally officers in the army. So if you're familiar with the Schweitzers and the guards and the famous military aspect, that's all because of the Knights of St. John and the mercenaries. And it's the mercenaries and their white cross that's going to be the flag of Switzerland and the flag of banking, sort of basically. So that's the first major play into banking that's going to have to be replaced. And the Rothschilds are going to be the replacement to the banking facilities outside the church. And they're going to set up the Bowers, who changed their name to the Rothschilds in 1790 when they set up the London Bank. And so they're going to be, well, we'll get into that a little bit further. Let's go to the second arm that we need to understand.
Gary, do you mind
This
if I
will,
ask a quick question?
yep.
I just the bankers that you're talking about right now, are they rivals to the Vatican? Are they part of the Vatican? Are they
I,
sponsored by them? I just
I,
wonder what that relationship is.
I will get there. It's
Okay.
both.
Okay. Sounds good.
So,
All right. I'll be patient then.
yeah. So, and so when we look at who these Templars are, just before I move on to that second arm, is understand that these are all royales in the Knights Templar. And so de Bouillon is the first son of the Lorraine region of the Anjou. De Paon is. And of course, you have the folk of Anjou, which is going, and they're going to take their King of Jerusalem title with them. So they're linked into all of the royal families of France, and there's a few other ones interconnected in there at that time. So the second major force of banking is going to come from Phoenicia and from the old uh, tier commercial banking arm, which is also important to understand end time banking as well, with Babylon being the modern version of Tyr and controlling all the banking and commerce in Revelation 18, and grows so rich that the 10 kings are going to partner with Antichrist to overthrow Babylon. Just to back that up a little bit in terms of what I was saying. And so you have a wave of merchant royales from the Canaanite, Tyrian, Phoenician, Sidonian bloodlines that are going to move to Venice and Florence.
Mm.
And out of that comes the junior black nobility versus the senior black nobility. Not that these bloodlines aren't old coming out of Phoenicia, but in Rome, in Italy, they're considered the junior arm because they've migrated there. So that's going to include families like the Medicis, for example, and all of the families that come from Florence and Venice that are going to control banking for a significant period of time. And they're different from the senior black nobility because that's going to be like the Fabia gens, which is the military part, or the Julia gens that goes back to Augustus, Caesar, the 100 families, back to Romulus and Remus, and back to Ares, the patriarch god. Mars, as it would have been called in the Latin pantheon, and a different name as it would have been known in the Etruscan and Indo-Aryan language that was the original pantheon set up. So that banking is going to be in place for the Catholic Church right up to the time of the rise of the Templars. And then the Templars are going to take it, and then they're going to take that banking arm back again, right? Because the Medicis are in take over in about the 15 to 1600s in that sort of range. So you see that sort of jockeying back and forth. And so enter in one other organization called the Jesuits, which are sponsored by the Rosy Cross Order and the higher level of adepts of the 33 families that are going to try and get the new Templars back into uh, the Roman Church. And so in 1307, after the Knights Templars fall, in countries like Spain and in Portugal, for example, the King of Spain and the King of Portugal, they seize all of the Templar assets, so the Roman Church can't get it. And so in Spain, they set up the Montesa order. And it's basically a new Templar order. And you have the Calatrava order that's set up in Portugal. And so you have them controlling all of these assets for the kings of those two countries, and that is not going to go to Rome. Roll that forward to the early 1500s. The Montesa order is ran by a Grand Master named Francis Borgia, of the Borgia black nobility of the Pope lines, right? And he's a Basque in the royal court of the Holy Roman Emperor of Spain. And in the 1520s, Ignatius of Loyola, and with his Mary apparitions and initiations, comes along and is going to uh, change Rome is his mission from the inside. But he falls apart with the Inquisition inquisitors and ends up in jail. So Francis Borgia has been watching him, and he seems to have the zeal that he's looking for his greater plan, and he bails him out of jail, then uses his family connections and Holy Roman Emperor support to get sponsorship into papal bulls, just as the Knights Templar were, starting in about 1534, and those bulls will go right through the 1540s with a series of bulls, and I won't bore people with the minutiae on that. And so they get control of the seminary schools and education in the Roman Church at that time. And then in 1550, Francis Borgia becomes a Jesuit. By 1565, he becomes the third Grand Master of the Jesuit order. And by about 1570, between the King of Spain and Francis Borgia, they create a war between Spain and the Vatican for power and control, and they bankrupt basically the Vatican, or at least get them to heel. And in exchange for that, Francis Borgia gets control of the Roman Catholic banking, and he moves that to Switzerland.
Hmm.
Now, typically we understand the Rothschilds, the other arm, and I'll stop after this. I'm not going to take the whole show up on you
No.
on this, Ed. I just
Well,
wanted,
you're laying a
that's what,
foundation, bro. So
yeah,
that
I'm
you're laying
laying
the
the
foundation, which is
foundation
great.
so that we can
Yeah,
move forward. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And so the Rothschilds already are putting their assets um, into Switzerland, but they don't formally move that till about the 1990s to put their head office there. But Switzerland was created as a location for the royales and nobility, which are royals as well for the most part, to store money, and most of it's off the books. So if we think that the money that Elon Musk has, or Bezos, or Gates, that is nothing. And it's not the true money. And when I was trying to get research done on it in the early 2000s, late 1900s, I kept getting a consistency to the off the books number, and surprising how many people will talk off the record on off the books money. But it was estimated at that time to be somewhere between 300 and 500 trillion. You can only imagine what that would be today. And so their whole organizational structure of bloodlines can only be supported if you control the money and the commerce in the world. And they don't want people to have access to their money, and they don't want people to know how much they have. So that's why it was set up for the royales of the West.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible information. So that was a great layout. But Ed, if you want to step in and kind of lay
Yeah,
some groundwork too.
no, this is great. I was taking notes on
Yeah, me
while
too.
Gary was talking.
I was typing
Yeah,
over here too if you saw
b-
me.
because because I have like a big picture view of these things, and Gary was giving some great basically putting flesh on the bones of these things. So here's my contention, and I'll back this up or give my supposition as it relates to the book of Daniel, and back to Daniel chapter 7. My contention is that the Roman Empire never went away. It's still is in control and power to this day. So if you go to Daniel chapter 7, that's when he has a vision of these four beasts, four Therion, in Septuagint. These are, you have the lion, the bear, the leopard, and this indescribable beast, which it's interpreted as Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar being the lion, Medo-Persia being the bear, Greece under Alexander being the leopard, and then this final beast, which it says there would last till the end times, would logically be Rome. And of course, the idea or the thought that most people have, and we were all taught in school, is that the Roman Empire fell, around the third, fourth-ish century AD. But my contention is that if the Bible is correct, which I believe it is, that empire continues, and it just transformed from an imperial senate into a theocracy. We starting with Constantine. And and if you look at it to this day, and Gary's talking about this now, which is why I asked my question before, is that the bankers are the ones that are really running things, and those bankers seem to have their origin. And Gary was doing a great job of showing that origin. Now, so I'm just trying to trace that line back. Or the Orsini's and Medici's, I know those names, and that it's really sounding right. That's why I'm was taking those notes. So when in Daniel chapter 7, you basically have a trial going on because there is this idea of it's an esoteric term called as above, so below, and when people hear it, Christians, it kind of makes the hairs on your back of your neck stand up because that's the words of Aleister Crowley and Helena Blavatsky and those kind of folk. But what it actually is a spiritual law that all beings in the spiritual realm and in our realm have to obey, which is basically, in a nutshell, What is spoken in one realm manifests in the other. You speak it in the heavenly realms and manifests on earth and vice versa. And this is a law that even God, or Jehovah Yahweh of the Bible, participates in when he created the world. What did he do? He spoke it into existence. He spoke, let there be light, let there be animals, trees, so forth and so on. He spoke it in the heavens, it manifested on earth. We do the same thing when we pray. We speak in this realm so that it affects the spiritual realm. So that is a spiritual law that is objective, that all of us spirit beings, which we are spirit beings housed in these flesh bodies, we obey. So what's going on in Daniel chapter 7, when you see these beasts, um, this is the bad guys, the fallen angels, the fallen Elohim to be more accurate. This is their plan for how they're going to rule. They're going to have these through these four empires, and then in the last empire you have the little horn who is set up and speaks these pompous words. We know the entity we call the Antichrist, who is going to basically rule. And so they've basically spoken. This is the bad guys speaking what their plan is for how they're going to establish their kingdom. And so since they spoke it, it's going to manifest. We're seeing it manifest. We saw it because Daniel lived in the time of the Babylonian and Persian empires, and the other empires happened just as Daniel 7 said. So because they tipped their hand and said, "This is our plan," God could justly judge them because again, it's what Michael Heiser called the already but the not yet. They put their plan out there. So God said, "Great, that's your plan. Here's my counter plan." Because as soon as they made their plan, what happened next? You see the Ancient of Days, God sitting on his throne, books were open and thrones were set up. This is a courtroom. He can justly judge them based on their plan. And his judgment was that he would have a son of man riding on the clouds. One of the titles of God was Jehovah was the cloud rider. So a son of man, a human being riding on the clouds. He was basically saying a human being with the authority of God will inherit the nations. And of course, we know that's Jesus. So that's and yes, and Jesus will inherit all these nations. So that's God's counter plan to theirs. My whole point in this is that he's later all out in advance, and we know that this final empire, the indescribable beast, which I believe is Rome in all its phases, all the way up to now, and the influence that they have now through the banking industry, that's what we're seeing. So you speak things in one realm and they manifest in the other. And I just think that's really fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd underline a couple of things on that is number one is that uh, uh, so above, so below. Understand that they counterfeit everything in the and I know you know that, Ed, but just for the audience.
Yeah.
And so we ought not to try and justify why there's a similar expression, but we do need to understand how they understand it, because on everything they have a polytheist lens that they understand everything. Their heaven isn't above as we would understand it. Their heavens is in Hades or Sheol where their gods rule.
Right.
And so that's how they interpret that same thing. And so when they talk about God's will as well, they're using that Greek word thalem. So when you hear the thalamic ideology of Crowley that you were mentioning as well, and the thalamic organizational structures that they use that in a few different ways, all connecting into Hades. And one of the interesting sort of aspects of it is they use that, and it's poorly translated into the English language, the Greek word thalams. It's actually twice for like a sexual orgy. And it shouldn't be really translated that way, but that reflects their view, so to speak. And so the other thing to keep in mind is that the organizational structure of what they call their thalamic tree, which is an evergreen tree of Mount Hermon, just
Mhm.
as Amorites are compared to the cedars of Lebanon in Amos 2 as being tall as or being like the cedars of Lebanon. So this is their organizational structure that they use that I've been told, and it has a trunk organization. And so where the banking and commerce intersects into the Thalamic trunk organizations is at the Committee of 300 Families level. But you have a council of 33 families above that, and I referenced them as the ones that were the original group that of the what I would call the senior order of the Prior of Sion, or the barons, as they're talked about in Um, in the records of, I'm trying to think of the historian that comes out of the Middle East. There, it doesn't really matter. Um, and so above the Council of 33 families, you have the 13 Western families, and that's the Western organization with the Rosicrucians below, the Committee of 300, the Illuminati, and then first level of adepthood at Freemasonry. These are the Royal Masonic orders that dominate the Committee of 300, actually the top level of the Rosicrucians and up. And so what they say is we have our great agenda and our plans, but if we don't control the money, we can't assert that. So they have to have the money to propel their, what I call tongue in cheek, their perpetual war gene. You have to have the money to be able to do that. And so that's how they will look at these kinds of things. So when I look at how does that transfer down through history from the First Roman Empire, we see those terms of the Holy Roman Empire, that these black nobility, of the greater black nobility of Europe versus the uh, Italian black nobility, which is two terms, but you they're not always used for the larger organization or the smaller organization. They'll use them for both. So I call it the larger organization of the black mobility, which is the other bloodlines of the royales in Western Europe. And so there's that larger council that you will funnel some of those in. So when you see, when I talked about the Jesuits, they are not at the top of the order. I didn't even put them in the trunk order because they're the New Templars. And through the black nobility, you can, whether or not you want to utilize the junior one that sponsors them back into existence again and backs them in the wars in the late 1800s, that's the junior black mobility from Florence and Venice versus the senior black nobility. But if you go back into the Borgia line of the popes and back into them supplying people, it's more of the senior one. So you could make an argument that branch of the Cedar would go into either the Committee of 300 or the Council of 33. So that's how I would sort of place that. And the reason why they had to be reassembled was that they were disassembled by the Royals in the early 1800s because they were causing too much grief, like assassinating kings, overthrowing governments, all of what they were kind of sworn to do. And so they were forced by the Roman Church to disband them. And then with the Royals overplaying their hand a little bit and kidnapping and imprisoning popes in France, one of the popes decides that he's going to bring back the Jesuits because they need protection. And so they start to come back in with the Mary apparitions that start to come up with Lourdes and Fatima, and it all sort of works together in terms of how they come back. So yes, there are families like we talked about, the Medici, you mentioned the Orsini, definitely part of those bloodlines. You have the Conti, the Colonna, Messino, Borghese, families like that. But those are not at the top of the black nobility. Some of them is junior, some of them are part of the senior, but not of the more powerful ones. And Savoy would be the most prominent royale. That's an Anjou family line.
Savoy.
Wow. So you said at the top, you said Savoy.
Savoy, yes.
Are they what nationality would you
Well,
say?
Anjou is originally from the Middle East.
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
Yes, but they would go back through the De Vere family and then back to other names. And Anjou is, in their belief system, a reflection of their gene coming from Anu, the Sumerian pantheon god. So,
Okay.
and I cover that off in book two. So
Okay.
there's several different genses of the family. So in the Black Nobility, I think I might have mentioned the Fabia and the Julia gens. You have the Elby gens of
Yes.
Normandy and the Norse, and you also have the of the Greeks. You have two genses there. You have the Cretazens, which would be a post-Diluvian gens of Zeus creating like the Herculides bloodline. through Alkmene and Zeus. And these become the Gyges kings of Assyria, Asia Minor, parts of Greece. But you also have the traditional Hellenes Genos, which is a family that comes from Helen, son of Deucalion and Pyrrha, which are said to be the Greek Noah and his wife, whatever his wife's name is. We get no firm accounting and different ones in different apocrypha for the name of Noah's wife, but not listed in the Bible. And that is not a human survival arc story. It's either a counterfeit or it is a survival of giants on another arc, just as you have Utnapishtim or Ziusudra, which is two-thirds God, one-third human, and your typical archetypical giant and all of his family in the Sumerian tradition, and that's recorded in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In this case, Deucalion, son of Prometheus, which is a god.
Yeah, right.
So it's a giant survival story, if it's true. But they take the Hellenes or the Greek genos that the descendants of Japheth would have intermarried with in the Greece area and over it with the Juliagens from Romulus and Remus, which are the original Indo-Aryans of the Etruscans, just as the Scythians were a branch that would have been likely the originating Aboriginal people that the people of Babel sort of moved in amongst. But I'm down a rabbit hole. I want to back sort of out of here in terms of what we were talking about and get back on track. So there are other families of bloodlines like the Anjou. I mean, they produce a junior offshoot through intermarriage. That's the Plantagenet that most of the presidents take their bloodlines back to,
Wow. Okay.
Okay.
right?
Yeah, I've heard
Wow.
that before.
Yeah. And part of the Albigens is the Rollo bloodline that goes back to the Norse gods that changes, and they changed their name in 910 to 11 AD after expropriating Normandy from the Anjou. And they call it the Treaty of St. Clair, and they take the name St. Clair from there, which become the Sinclairs, right? And the De Bruces are part of that Rollo bloodline as well, who become the kings of Scotland that are going to intermarry with other Tuatha De Danann branches of Scotland and Ireland and the whole. So you've got that bloodline and different families to keep in mind. And you also have the Windsor family, which is the Hanover bloodline. And you can intermix some Cossacks in there and a couple other of that intermarrying and scioning that would also have Middle Europa. So they're very powerful. And we don't necessarily associate them with banking unless you link in the Knights of St. John that she has, or Queen Elizabeth had, was sitting at the top of that, and now King Charles III had. And the Knights of St. John was the other arm of Vatican and banking. And the Knights of St. John are members, they're less of now, but most of them still would be all sons of the Royals. You have to have that as your pedigree to be there. They actually have nation status in the UN,
Mm.
which most people don't know, and a few other privileges there as well. And they were heavily involved in business and banking and politics. And so similar to the Jesuits, and now of course you have a Jesuit who's in charge of both of those organizations. So double powerful. So we need to keep those families in line. The Habsburgs are very rich and powerful as well and are in behind the scenes as well. And they're part of the Hanover, Middle Europe intermarriage of bloodlines, but also the Anjou with the intermarriage of the Lorraine families that becomes the Habsburg-Lorraine dynasty. And then that's how you get that Habsburg-Lorraine King of Jerusalem title passed on to them, which is now held by King Philippe Bourbon in Spain.
Spain, yeah, Spain.
Yeah. Through intermarriage and inheriting that, and controls the Knights of the Golden Fleece Order that King Charles would have also a chair at, because Queen Elizabeth had a chair there before. And so, you'll find this interesting. The Norse Royal Masonic Order of Royals is called the Knights of the Seraphim.
That one is, yeah, I looked
Wow.
that
Yeah,
up when you told me that on the show. Yeah.
you just can't make some of this stuff up, so
Wow.
they just sort of put it in. So we need to keep those families in line. So part of the other families that are going to be involved on the commerce and the money is the geezer, and people aren't all that familiar with them. Um, I think that's probably the main ones that we have to keep in mind when we're talking about the money, but understand all the Royales have a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
And it's just off the books. But there are other families from Europe, and who knows who the final 13 are. I mean, you get different ones, but it's certainly not the pseudo blue bloods from North America.
Amazing. Well, that's awesome. And to bring it to now, where do like BlackRock, Vanguard, and like World Economic Forum fit into these equations?
Go ahead, Ed.
Oh.
It's your turn. I'll come in
Okay.
afterwards.
Um, I'm going to say I don't have anywhere near Gary's research into where
It,
these things are going in the small picture sense, but I'll take it back to some of my bigger picture ideas. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
listening to everything that Gary is saying, which is again amazing, it's like we have two different worlds. We have the world that those of us who don't have this bloodline live, and you have this other world, that's embedded within our world that is just these people. It's amazing, an amazing web of folks, these Nephilim bloodlines that and one thing, a bit of trivia that your audience may already know when Gary was mentioning the Borgias, it just reminds me of the no Rodrigo Borgia, who became Pope Alexander, I think the third or the sixth, I forget which one. And of course, his son Cesare Borgia was the person by whom they modeled the medieval Jesus on. So when we see, the Jesus with the goatee and the beard, that's not a Middle Eastern Jewish man. That's just Cesare Borgia. They, because Rodrigo Borgia, the Pope Alexander, became Pope right around the time of the Renaissance, when you had all these great artists, Michelangelo, Raphael, all those guys who were painting the highest thing they could imagine, which was of course the biblical stories. And Alexander said, well, since I am the Pope, I'm God on earth. My son is technically the son of God on earth, so make Jesus look like him. And of course, Cesare Borgia wasn't depicted as Jesus because he was such a great guy. He was actually a horrible human being. He was a murderer. He incest. He loved having intercourse with his sister Lucretia, but that's who we see when we see Jesus. But one thing I want to back up on, these bloodlines, these people, we have this idea that their goal is to rule the world. That's not their big goal. Because if that was the case, they already do. I mean, they effectively rule the world. What do they really want? I think we have to go all the way back to the fallen angels, the fallen Elohim in Genesis chapter 6 and in the pseudepigraphal book of Enoch. What did they want? They weren't trying to rule humanity. They wanted to replace humanity. These fallen angels wanted to replace God's offspring, God's physical spiritual hybrids, humanity, with their physical spiritual hybrids, the Nephilim. So I just want to make that really clear to the viewers and listeners that the ultimate goal is not to rule us, it's to replace us. That's why these bloodlines, that's one of the reasons why I believe these bloodlines are so heavily guarded. They want to make sure that the people who are on top have these bloodlines so that they will be the ones who will ultimately um, be in control of the planet, and they want to wipe the rest of us out. That's their ultimate goal. And getting a little bit esoteric into Revelation, because I on YouTube I have an entire series of 60 episodes on the book of Revelation, and my supposition is that the mark of the beast is, and I get this from my research I've done with L.A. Marzulli and some others. I think the mark of the beast is going to alter genetics. I think it's going to alter genetics to either make people into Nephilim or to make them fit hosts for the spirit demons, which are the spirit of disembodied Nephilim, to inhabit. Because their ultimate goal, again, is to make every person take this mark. Because if they do, if they either they're altered to become Nephilim, or they are altered to be able to house these spirits. And that's how they will do the takeover. And anyone who doesn't do it is going to be killed. And And that is the explanation that people may wonder about why people who take the mark can't be saved. Because the Bible is very explicit in Revelation. If you take this mark, you're ineligible for salvation. How does that make sense if you're still a human being? Can't you take the mark and then say, hey, you know what? I was wrong. God, I'm sorry. I want to change. I want to accept you. What if that mark alters you to the point where you're no longer human? And if
Mm.
you're no longer human, you aren't eligible for salvation because Jesus didn't die for anyone who was, Jesus became a human being and died for humans. If you're not a human, then you are not eligible for salvation. Or if you are inhabited by a demonic spirit, then you can't repent because you're no longer driving your car. You have another entity next to you who's in control, and they would never repent. And this may also be why may also answer the mystery that you get in that you see in during the seven trumpets. I think that the fifth trumpet judgment, where people are being attacked by these demonic locusts, and they want to die but they can't. Well, maybe the reason they can't is because they're not driving. There's something else is driving that won't let them. So they feel the pain of these things or whatever, but they're no longer in control of their faculties. So back to the big picture, I think that's really what's going on is an attempted Nephilim takeover and to basically replace us. Population control, all those things are in line to get rid of normal humanity and replace them with the Nephilim bloodlines because these entities, they don't have any imagination. They can't think of anything new. If you want to know what their goal is, go back to the beginning, and that was their goal in Genesis chapter 6. We are going to replace humanity, and that's what they're still trying to do.
And to destroy us by fire.
Yes.
And that probably was their intent before the flood, and we're just catching back up to that technology. And
Yeah.
flood's probably an intercession by God, just as 2 Peter 3 talks about that, the world in the beginning that was destroyed by fire, that's the same destruction reserved for the end times. So, and that's why Shiva is the god being honored as a destroyer god that you would recognize with the same title as Abaddon and Apollyon coming out of the pit prison just before the midpoint of the last 7 years.
Right. And isn't that the goddess on the CERN? And isn't that the
That's a
statue?
god. That's a
Yeah.
god. Yeah,
God. Yes. Yes. Yes.
and a horn god.
God. Okay.
So,
Gotcha.
and you may not be aware of it, but the horn god, whether it's Odin or Cernunnos in the Druidic, these are all satyr gods, satyr gods,
Okay.
and goat gods, degraded seraphim.
Mhm.
And you have an Etruscan god, proto Latin and Romans, that was called CERN, CERN. It's an Indo-Aryan word that's spelled CERN or KERN, and Kern or CERN, and you'll see it transliterated both ways. It'll show up as Keren in Hebrew for a horn or a mountain, QEREN, as that would be transliterated into English. And it means in Indo-Aryan, a horn-headed god.
Wow. That's interesting. Wow.
Yeah. So all of this is always going to be interconnected. And Shiva is the god that comes to um, destroys the world, and through destruction of the world recreates a new world, and does it through fire. And just as Lord Maitreya is that Antichrist sort of allegory from the east of subcontinent India, New Age that they use it, that's Indo-Aryan for Mitra.
Mm.
And Lord Maitreya actually means Maitreya in Hinduism and Sanskrit actually means a covenant or an alliance. And Mithra comes at the end of the age, like Shiva comes at the end of the age. So essentially the same god. And Shiva is kind of an evolution in its name into Shiva. People are trying to figure out where it comes from. I think it comes from Mithra, but that's just connecting the dots that Mithra is also the god of uh, the god of the Zoroastrians and the main god for Mithra in the time of Rome. That's part of the convergence of that whole understanding and birth date of December 25 into Christianity with Constantine and
Right.
all of that. And the goat god that the Templars worshipped was Baphomet, which was an
Mhm.
Icarus angel, which is the Greek word that's used for the mighty angels in the book of Revelation. Only there. The other ones you go back to Dunamis. And you'll like this as well, you guys probably. And it means Baphomet means father Mitra or Mitra. And you drop the H. H is added to languages throughout history, like, for example, Nephilim would be originally Nepilim, originally NPL. Rephaim would be Rapium without the H, and RPM in the original Semitic as it would have been done. So the H is kind of added into a lot of these words.
Hmm.
So that's common with that Mitra, Mitra, and Mithra. So, and in 2025, Alice Bailey said this was the time of the age of Lord Maitreya coming,
Yeah.
not necessarily specifically that year that we would recognize him or see him from an occult perspective. But anyways, and so when I look at all of this, I see this all directly connected into the end time. And as we see sort of this invisible empire of the Roman Empire that's not fully jointed and together, and a lot of rivalries going on, but never really goes away like what you're saying, but will come back together
Mhm.
in the end time. And it's amongst these 10 horns in Daniel 7 that you're referring to for the beast empires that this little horn is going to rise amongst and comes to power at the midpoint of the last 7 years, and is the same little horn that's talked about with the beast empires, with the same numbers of seven throughout history, just a different allegorical information in Daniel 8 that rises out of the as a single horn as well in the end time. And obviously the same as the metallic empires of Daniel 2, which is a giant
Right.
statue,
Yeah.
right? And diluted bloodlines coming down. So we have an option of diluted bloodlines running of the royales that are going to be having the 10 kings, or we're going to see new Nephilim created or return if they were saved somehow, some way in the earth, off the earth, in stasis, whatever the method. And or we're going to see, as you were talking about, Oiketarians created for
Mhm.
the demonic disembodied spirits because they need a soul and a body to interact with the physical world. If people aren't familiar with where Oiketarian comes from, that's the habitation the angels left in heaven, and that means, as a Oiketarian is the Greek word there, a dwelling place for a spirit. So that's how angels, when they take a physical form in the physical world, and we know they can because Hebrews 13 tells us to be kind to strangers,
Hmm.
lest we
Yeah.
run across an angel unawares. We have angels taking physical bodies that aren't recognized at first by Abraham as angels, but the same ones when they go to Sodom and Gomorrah are recognized as angels. So they can decide whether or not to be recognized or not. So they have that ability to create that oiketarian for their spirit being to merge with the soul. So you got three components: the spirit that comes from heaven, you've got the soul and the body, which are of the physical universe. So they're going to need some sort of oiketarian for the disembodied spirits, and the ones that come up out of the pit prison, the terrible ones that are recorded in Ezekiel 32 and Isaiah 25, that are going to need oiketarians, and may even be those chimera type of riders on those chimera type of war animals that are an extension of the third woe in Revelation 9. So
Mhm.
all of that is coming together, and that this empire is somehow going to come together, likely because of the false prophets of Babylon and their false prophecies and contrived catastrophes. And they're going to strive to put those 10 empires around the world together, but struggle and not get it done. I think it's going to be Babylon that's going to be the key, because Babylon rides the beast of empires. This is the daughter of Babel, as the religions, and this is the mother that is coming back. The old religion,
Yeah. Right.
the original religion is coming back of Babel, and the antediluvian religion that Nimrod inherits and receives from Hermes, according to the polytheists. So all of this is going to be coming together in this end time empire of 10 kings, and they're going to be subservient until they overthrow Babylon, who's going to control the banking. So expect the Jesuits to get out of control and go rogue again, along with the rise of the universal religion. Now, how does that link back into with BlackRock that you're talking about for where do they fit in into the hierarchy? So they are pseudo. So they're maybe low-level bloodlines or trying to intermarry and be sponsored and through generations to increase their bloodlines. So the example of that is going to be what the Rothschilds do with the pseudo blue bloods for North America, like the Rockefellers, like the Warburgs, like the Carnegies, all of the DuPonts. They will fund all of those families, obviously because they have a genealogy that is quite diluted, um, because they always keep this in-house. They're going to fund them to become the pseudo blue bloods of North America. And over the generations, they continue to intermarry. And the Rockefellers and the Morgans and all of them are still extremely loyal to the Rothschilds. And the Rothschilds were low level and Jewish until they changed their name to Rothschild in 1790 with the London Bank opening. So expect something like that in terms of how they fit in. So the Rothschilds aren't a center trunk order, and they're not part of any of those main families that I talked about. So they're going to be Rosicrucian or Committee of 300 best case scenario through years of intermarriage. And so when we look at the banking side, that's the Rothschilds. But we also have another example where we have the B20 and the G20, and they're kind of merging. And that Davos crew, they also connect into the Committee of 300. And so I think that's a separate branch organization. It could be part of the Rothschilds, but it just seems to be a little bit more distinct because it has more of a wider range and not specifically banking. Hedge funding can be related to banking, but it's technically not banking, right? So I think that's part of its own branch and hierarchy that goes on. And there may be one branch organization I haven't found that would connect them into the thalamic tree, but I think that's how it would fit in. And all of the IMF, all of the World Trade Organizations, anything to do with banking or commerce intersects into the Committee of 300 Families.
Hmm.
And that's where all of that is generated from. And so it's important to sort of say, okay, if we're trying to figure things out on the puzzles, that's how I would sort of do the reasoning of it. But again, they would be pseudos. Now, when we look at Babylon in the end time, it controls all of this until the midpoint of the last 7 years. And when we look at the great and mighty men of the end time and the kings of the end time, they're used interchangeably in Revelation 6 and in Revelation 19 and Revelation 18. And they go back to a couple of words, megas and megastranes, which goes back to Indo-Aryan meg for a giant ruler, essentially. And mega and megastranes and grandes that are sort of etymological extensions out of those Greek words. It all describes large, extraordinary, old, and is connected in with genealogical descendants. So like, for example, grandes would be the root word that goes back to megas and megastranes for grandfather. And then you have great, and great
Yeah.
would be going back to megas and megastranes as well. And so those words populate our language. So when we look at these mighty men that are talked about in the end time, these are royals, kings of
Okay.
God. Kings of God is royale, AL. You could look at that as a transliteration of El, an angel or a god, as in Baal, meaning Lord God in one of its translations, or as you take um, El to Elohim, the feminine Eloah,
Mhm.
and words associated with that, which would be Allah, Alah, a feminine
Ah,
application of the same word. Typically, the feminine ones is the application of wisdom, the application of power. So if you had like Gibberim and the female is Gibberah, it's not, it can mean a female Nephilim, but it's usually the application of the word might as it's used in the Old Testament. So when we look at these royales, as you take that back to Old French, it's roi for king, and and L, which is rooted as a group of words that go back to regal and regalis in Latin, back to reg for ruler again in Indo-Aryan. And it means the kings of God.
So Gary, let me ask you this then. Those 10 kings
Yep.
I've talked about them, you talked about them. Do you think that these are human kings? Do you think they are supernatural? Do you think they're angels? Because I've gone back and forth. Right now, I'm landing on them being, just because of the way they're mentioned in Daniel 7 as well as in Revelation. I'm thinking that they're supernatural. Do you and they're the ones who are going to give their kingdom over to the beast. What do you think?
Yeah, I was gonna ask, Dora, are they the if they are the human ones, are they the families
Yeah.
that you're talking about? Are they the hidden families that haven't came out? Maybe they come out then?
It's you could look at it in a couple of different ways in that, and it's kind of a yes, yes, and yes sort of thing to the three questions that were thrown out there. So let's look at the beast empires. These are bloodlines of the Rephaim post-Diluvian giants, and they are more pure in their bloodlines with gold in Daniel 2 with the metallic, and then it goes to silver, and then it goes to bronze with Alexander, and then it goes to iron. So you can see a degradation of the metal, and that's usually could be understood as a dilution of the bloodlines and intermarriage with humans so that they don't go extinct. And so then they're going to mix their blood. In Daniel 2:43, they're going to mix with their seed with humans in Daniel 2:43. So you could understand that as being bloodline descendants of the empires that are going to mix their seed with some of the humans. So you could have maybe five strongmen, let's say, and five royales that might be there, and they're going to intermarry and intermix. But it's the mixing of that seed, which is there's two different species here.
Right, right.
Now, when you take that back to Hebrew, you could infer it's a demonic possession as well, but it's the mixing of the seed. But then if they created an oikotarian for themselves, or they possessed these kings, you could see both of that sort of happening. Now, when you roll that forward to say, well, what else do we have for royal bloodlines of the Gentiles that we could look to in other passages to mix some of the things that I've been talking about? I think the best one is Psalms 21, 8 through 10. And in there, it's an end time reference to a prophecy in the time of God's anger and wrath and fire, is that he is going to destroy the fruit and their fruit and the seed of that fruit from the seed of humankind in the time of the wrath.
Hmm.
That's talking about two different seed lines that are separated. That seems to be reflective in Daniel 2:43. And these are the terrible ones, it seems, that are going to be killed on a mountain in the end time in Isaiah 25. And they're called a branch of the terrible ones. And then in Ezekiel 32, where you have other references to the terrible ones, Hebrew erit, the retim to get to ones as the translators have translated as eritim. And it has all these different descriptions on them in terms of, strong, mighty, but also has a childless and fertility issue as part of that definition, which is why they need to intermarry. And these are the ones that are slain while they were on earth and are in the sides of the pit prison, along with the mighty, the El, or the angels that are in the pit prison as well. And both the El, or the Elohim, small case, and these terrible ones are speaking to another Rephaim Pharaoh from the pit prison in this incredible dual prophecy. And these are the ones who did horrible things to humankind.
Right.
And they're the ones that are going to be killed in Isaiah 25, the branch of these terrible ones. And so, and you'll see that all linked in book 2 for you
Okay.
when you get to reading it. Um, so I think, yeah, there's these bloodlines that we need to deal with because they're the visible ones ruling for the invisible ones today. But we can't take off the table that there might not be giants somehow, some way, because it's going to be like the days of Noah,
Right,
both
exactly.
before and after the flood. And Ecclesiastics 1, I think, which is what you were referencing before, there's nothing new under the sun. What was will be again.
Mhm.
And as you move on in that passage in 17 and 18, I think it says, the understanding of this will only bring grief and sorrow.
Yeah, my
Like it,
yeah.
so yes, I think it could be a mix of it all, or it could be one. But there is this seed line that is being um, looked after, and it's called the serpent's root
mhm,
from the
yeah,
serpent seed in Genesis 3:15. This is in Isaiah 14:25 to 29. And it's talking about seraphim angels and everything else that's involved there as well, along with the Assyrian that's being destroyed in the end time.
right.
So
Yeah,
as you start to link in these meanings, it starts to make sense. And Assyrian, for people who may not be aware, is used a number of times in the Old Testament as an allegory for the end time Antichrist. And Asher is one of the terrible ones in Ezekiel 32.
yeah. So oh, go ahead, Josh.
No, Ed, go ahead, man. You
Okay.
go. You go.
Well, so because this is great, because I think people are not ready for the level of supernatural insanity that's going to be going on in the very end times, in that 7 year period that Christians refer to
They
as
are not ready
tribulation.
for it.
No, not at all, because there's going to be, as you said, Gary, as it was in the days of Noah. And it always tickles me when people say, "Oh, that just means business as usual. They're marrying and giving in marriage." Like, no, no, no. The time right before Jesus returns isn't going to be anything but normal. If you look at, the bowls of wrath, the trumpets, this it's not going to be business as usual to a first century Jewish person who to whom Jesus was speaking. The days of Noah means Nephilim. It means all these insane things going on. My take on and it's a little off the wall. I may not agree with it. I'm totally fine with that. I could be completely wrong. But when I look at Genesis 6, the opening of those first six seals with the four horsemen and then the martyrs and then the cosmic disturbances, many commentators believe that this is either an overview of that entire period or it is the beginning of God's judgment. I don't think it's that at all. I think that those seals, those especially the horsemen, are actually a false apocalypse created by Satan. Here's why I think that, and I go back to the Olivet Discourse for that. When the disciples came and asked Jesus, those two questions: when will these things be, the destruction of the temple, and what will be the signs of your coming and the end of the age? First thing Jesus says is, "Don't be deceived." So everything, here's a deception. There's going to be false Christs. There are going to be wars and rumors of wars, earthquakes, pestilences, so forth and so on. But these things are not the end. I think they're a deception of the end. I think that these are because, again, if we're talking about the Antichrist being a false Messiah, well, false Messiah, you got to have a false apocalypse in order to usher in your false Messiah, your false second coming. And that's what I think is going on there. And that's my opinion. I give my full reasons in my videos there. But my two proof points is number one, the cry of the martyrs at the fifth, when the fifth seal is opened. They say, "How long, O Lord, until you avenge us?" Well, if this was from God, why would they be saying that? Why would they be asking how long? And why would God tell them to wait? Wouldn't he would either say, "Oh, look, guys, I'm doing it. Just, look, I'm judging everything now." But he doesn't. He says, "Wait." And then, of course, you have it at the opening of the sixth seal, and I'm going to get to my point on why I brought that up in a sec. The all the mighty men, which Gary talking about, they hide in the mountains, and what do they say? They say, "Hide us from what? The wrath of the Lamb." This is the only place in the Bible where the term wrath is applied to the Lamb. And who's this? And it's said by evil men. I think that this is the deception is that all these things that are being brought, the Antichrist, the first horseman, the second horseman, which people call war, but it's not. It actually doesn't say war. It says men will kill one another. That word kills the word Greek word spatzo. Spatzo means a sacrifice. That's slaughter for the sake of a sacrifice. I think it's a blood sacrifice, which a massive blood sacrifice, which is going to unleash demonic power into the world because all these satanic rituals always have something to do with blood or sex because that's where life is. Life is in the blood. Life is obviously in sex because that's where you procreate. And I think that life energy is what causes thins the veil between our two realms and causes spiritual energy to come in. And of course, the black horseman, that's hyperinflation. that you have to work an entire day for a loaf of bread, or not even a loaf of bread, for a piece of bread, a roll basically. That's hyperinflation, which we know that the bankers are capable of doing that at any point. So that's what. But my point is, when you get to the sixth seal, what happens? You have the stars of heaven being flung down to earth. Of course, these are not literal stars. Literal stars are gigantic. And even if you're a flat earther, you have to admit that if stars fell to heaven, fell to the
Oh yeah.
heavens, fell to earth, you would that would be devastating. No, these are angels, the fallen angels being cast down to earth. Why? Because all the players need to be on the board for God to judge, to pour out his wrath. I think he needs everyone. They're going to be in their Okaterion on earth, in my opinion, so that they can be judged. So when they appear on earth, what are they going to say to people when they are stuck here? I think they're going to say that they are either some type of alien UFO thing, or they're ascended masters, or we are the gods come back. We are the old ones who have come back at this critical time to guide mankind into the future. And so that's why I asked Gary, did you think that these kings might be, something supernatural? There's a possibility that maybe some of these fallen angels present themselves as kings. But I think your supposition that they are some of the mighty ones, the human Nephilim hybrids. I'm open to all of it. But that's what But that's my opinion on Genesis. Excuse me, Genesis on Revelation
Yeah.
6, and I think
Well,
it's going to be some really strange times, and there's going to be no
we,
atheists left in the world at this
yeah,
point because there's going to
we
be so much supernatural going on.
we cannot imagine what's coming. We can
No.
only try and get into the shoes of the antediluvians to sort of understand that. And
Yeah.
when you look at the angels coming back, the stars could be angels, and they may be coming back and they don't care. The time is short. They're going to take their oiketerions again because they haven't been walking amongst us since the time of the early offspring gods after the flood. And then they kind of disappear. Doesn't mean they're not ruling from the council of the gods, but they're just
Mhm.
not in bodies walking amongst us. And they will walk amongst us to be like the days of Noah, both before and after the flood.
Yeah.
So that is the avatar effect. Avatar being the angelic being, the avatara being the receiving that shares the soul and the body with the individual, just as Vishnu incarnated into um, Buddha to give him the wisdom,
Mhm.
and and incarnated, I think, 16 to 20 times. And Maitreya is thought to be uh, either an incarnation or Vishnu in that sort of sense that is coming back as an incarnation in the end time.
Mhm.
And even Shiva incarnates several times, not as many as Vishnu. I think Shiva was only a dozen times as it's recorded in the Vedas. But we know this is a possibility because in the time of Jesus, you have Satan entering into Judas to give him the courage to go through with betraying Jesus. So we know Satan has the ability to do that. And we don't know how many ranks and orders have the ability to do that. But certainly demons do something similar, but lower level as demonic possession. And typically it doesn't turn out well. And I know some of the occultists believe they have enough knowledge and they know names and rituals and words they can control that demon spirit when they bring them in for additional power. But I wouldn't be banking on that. I wouldn't advise that to even them to do that, so to speak. So yeah, we need to be aware that there's possibilities here that we have to make ourselves prepared for because we have no idea how awful this is going to be. And the days of Noah can be understood as a generation, just as it's the fig tree generation. And so in book two, what I do in chapter one, I start off with the days of Noah. Not that I don't talk about it in book one, but I wanted to do it in a way that takes the whole argument off the table for people, that I show how days of Noah is used in passages that are reflecting end time destructions. That's going to be like the destruction that was in the time of Noah, and that this was also used in the same terminology as when those angels made the sins to create the giants. So I put those all together in chapter one because I just was wanted to put something together for Christians because they get knocked off on that, and understand the violence is caused by the war gene and the giants. I like to say they have. I mean, they were the ones that were given according to the book of Enoch, not scripture, but we see that as giving us information on this violence. They're the ones who caused the wars,
Right.
right? And wars
Yeah,
and rumors
they
of
taught
wars are,
weapons. Yeah.
yeah, are one of the sorrows,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so they're going to get stronger as the fig tree generation goes forward. And that they were given the technology of war and the crafts of war, the strategies of war by Azazel. Azazel is the destroyer god
Mhm.
and the scapegoat for all of the sins of the world in the antediluvian world, and is likely the title of Abaddon and Apollyon as he comes, out of the pit prison that he says he's imprisoned into in the book of Enoch. Certainly a good candidate for it because he's called the leader of the rebellious ones in that book. So
Yeah,
um,
and it's interesting how when those the demons or demonic entities are released from the pit, they're released for 5 months, same amount of
yeah,
time that the flood.
well, they'll be here for longer than that. But
Oh, well, I mean,
maybe I'll
they
get there.
torment
Maybe
me
I'll
for
get
five
there in
months.
a
Excuse me.
minute.
That
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So when we look at now, and you're talking about the opening of the seals, and this is the same spirit beings that come from the throne of God in Zechariah 6 with the
yeah.
horses
Those
and
other
the
forces. Yeah.
chariots.
Mhm.
And these are spirits of God from the throne, just as these four riders come from, they're not demonic spirits as polytheists have taken that and tried to scare us with. These are the four winds of prophecy. These are the same four winds that blow up the beast kingdoms that includes the end time empire. And so this is making sure that that empire is in place for the last 7 years, I think, or in at least around that time zone, as to not to get too legalistic on it. And that when we look at what's going on in the seal openings, I would look at that first rider not necessarily being an antichrist type figure, but it's a rider that has a boa and a crown.
Mhm.
And crown is like Stephanos
Right.
is the Greek word there, and it generally is understood as a horn crown of Jesus would wear, as we understand it from a Christian perspective in its definition, but also understand in polytheism as in a wreath made from the laurel tree,
Mhm.
which is the root word for Lorraine in the Lorraine region of the Anjou, who say they have the King of Jerusalem title. And it was the crown that the Greek gods wore and the crown that they put on the heads of the Olympian giants as they competed and won. And then the word bow isn't like a weapon bow, it means a simple fabric.
Okay.
Toxin is the word there, and I think it's referring to the Greek robes of the gods and the nobles and the same white robes that the Roman Empire. So it doesn't mean the world isn't going to be conquered, because it is going to be conquered, but not quite the way that people are thinking about it. And that as we move forward with the birth pangs, that also included earthquakes, also included famine and pestilence. Those are all working together. And I think, as you said, and I say, these are contrived catastrophes. God's not judging us. And he doesn't judge people that he's going to be saving.
Right.
He's going to save us from the wrath. This is part of the tribulation
Mhm.
versus the wrath.
Mhm.
But this is, I think, caused by those who rule the earth and the fallen angels.
Mhm.
And so we're going to see wars get stronger as these empires start to assemble and the false prophets of Babylon come along and make their predictions of these catastrophes that they know is going to happen because they're causing them.
Right.
They're part of the organizational structure to do that. And, if we had a war that got rid of 10% of the population,
Mhm.
we would call that Armageddon. It's apocalyptic. But yet in Revelation 6, 25% of the earth and the people die. And
Right.
yet that's not Armageddon, but the royales, the top two levels of the classes of the world that they populate versus the bottom two, which are where the humans populate, um, is they're running into their caves. their underground fortresses, their
Yeah.
underground cities,
Yeah, the
however you want
domes. Yeah, yeah.
for protection, because as you said, they think it's the day of the Lord, but it's
Hmm.
not. The year of
Right.
the Lord's wrath is the last year of the last 7 years, but
Right.
it's so bad they think it is.
Yeah.
But it's not Armageddon, and it's not the time of Antichrist yet. But there is another war that comes that's in
Mhm.
Revelation 9, Joel 1 and 2, and Ezekiel 38 and 39
Mhm.
that I think Antichrist utilizes as his Armageddon that you were talking about, because he has to have an Armageddon
Right.
war
Yes.
to fulfill his credentials. And that's why we see the book of Luke and Daniel talking about Antichrist after this large army is swept away in Daniel 11, moves his armies into Jerusalem, and that's when he sets up the abomination.
Okay.
And so it just sort of fits as you start to put those pieces together. And so, yeah, those seals are going to be absolutely horrible. And it's going to get worse because the
Right.
trumpets are 33% destruction and
Exactly.
more stars falling to the earth.
Mhm.
And by the time of Revelation 9 and the first woe, all the ones that were imprisoned are out. Now we have the worst of them. Then they're all together in Revelation 12 for the war in heaven,
Mhm.
which matches up with the same time of Antichrist rising in Daniel 8, another one, a prophecy that you need to understand for the end time. We talked about it with the different numbers of, or same numbers, but different um, empires being used with the five of the Greek and then the Roman and then the end time empire.
Right.
So to get you to the seven. So when we look at, um, I lost my train of thought there, but when we look at that happening in Daniel 8:10, that's when Antichrist rises into heaven, throws down some of the starry host.
Right. Yeah. And tramples on me. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and because he's already received the power from
Mhm.
Satan and whomever else that is providing him power, perhaps demons, because he controls demons. They may be in them, and with his mouth, he's controlling them, however that comes about. So that's the war, I think, is where you have the 200 million man war
Oh, okay. Okay.
and
Interesting.
Joel 1 and 2. Those matches perfectly. And in book two, I put the descriptions of those beings in the Joel 1 and 2 war, which isn't Armageddon, which comes in Joel 3
Mhm.
later. And you put that beside the description of Revelation 9, they're identical.
Okay.
And Ezekiel 38 and 39 is in the last days and before second Exodus. So got to be before the midpoint and is likely the same. And of course, it makes sense when you get names like Gog of Magog, chief prince of Meshech, and Gog is a giant,
Hmm.
both before and after the flood. And the original Gog is son of Iapetus,
Oh,
a
okay.
parent god of the Greek mythology that Poseidon actually inherits that mythos for. And he marries um, Plato versus Clymene, that Poseidon in his mythos creates the 10 Atlantean kings. It's Iapetus produces Gog, Magog, and Albion. And then you see those sea giants named after them on the other side of the flood as well. And they're part of the Gyges, Herculides bloodline of the Cretagens, but I'm starting to get into too many rabbit holes here. So anyways, it's the timing fits, and it
Yeah.
needs to be a war that is large enough that people would say that had to be Armageddon.
Hmm.
This is
Yeah.
like
So I
your
think.
wheel. This is like your
Go ahead.
wheelhouse too, Ed. So I'm kind of glad we went to Revelation now. So I
Yeah,
know
totally.
this is
I
something
love
you.
this. I mean, just yeah, because I see a lot of my thoughts and Gary's kind of dovetailing and go because, like you said, Gary, we don't know exactly how all these things. We're all theorizing, and I love it because I think that on some we're all on the same page. In some places, there are some little minor differences here, and so be it. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm doing my best, and using what I've learned, and I'm learning more now. And yeah, so I'm going to make sure that I add some of the Joel scriptures to my exegesis because I did not do that in my original Revelation series, but I may go back and update it with some of those verses. Oh, one question for you. Going to the mother of harlots, the woman who rides the beast, do you think that is or is related to Nimrod's wife, Semiramis?
Well, she would be um, probably a giant or a
Okay.
hybrid giant
Mhm.
versus an offspring god, um, and certainly a divine representative as a mother goddess, just as the kings and Nimrod is going to go with the polytheist tradition of the other giants there. They were understood as spurious offspring of the gods
Mhm.
and were a reflection of those celestial mafia godfathers and godmothers, right? So they would be considering themselves that god on earth, is how they would understand that. So when we start looking at the pantheons, we need to separate the demigods from the full-fledged gods, and we need
Okay.
to separate the offspring gods from the parent gods.
Mhm.
The parent gods, if it really helps for people trying to study prehistory, if you look at the parent gods as the ones who reigned before the flood.
Okay.
So in the example of Greek, that would be Kronos and
Mhm.
Gaia, and then you would have um, Zeus as the offspring god and the associated um, other female gods in the Greek pantheon, whether it's Aphrodite or um, all the other ones that go along with it. In the Canaanite pantheon, El and Ashtaroth are the two parents, and then Baal and Anat are the two that are the mother and the father gods of the pantheon after the flood, with the rest of the Baalim,
Mhm.
uh, I am being the plural there, that is ruling from the council. You would have, like Anu is the parent god before the flood in the Sumerian. Enki and Enlil are offspring
Yeah.
gods that rule
Mhm.
after the flood.
Okay.
So, and in all the pantheons around the world, they overthrow the parent gods. And these are all the same gods in each of these pantheons, it's just different vernacular names.
Right.
So,
Especially, yeah. Yeah.
so the religion that Hermes inherits, he either gets from the giants, but according to the Gnostics and the secret societies, they say Hermes, Harmine, as he's recorded in the Polychronicon and history of Freemasonry, finds the two pillars of Enoch, son of Cain, or Lamech, depending on which source that you're using, and they both say the same thing. Um, they had the location of all of the antediluvian knowledge and the religion buried underneath the Great Pyramid in 365,025 books and stacked in 9 vaults. That Hermes finds the pillar, finds the directions to that, takes that knowledge back to Nimrod, and he implements that Babel religion. And then all the religions of the beast empires are the daughters of religion after that.
Mhm. Okay.
That's why the allegory is important to follow as it goes through the prehistory to understand why mother, why daughters.
Right.
We're not getting a daughter religion. We're getting the mother religion. And Babylon is rooted in the Hebrew word Babel, with its
Mhm.
etymology for the biblical side of it. So it's the Babel religion, and that's the Enochian mysticism. When I talk about Enoch, I'm talking about Enoch, son of
Son of,
Cain,
yeah, Cain,
versus,
Cain's line. Right.
yeah, for,
Yeah.
for people out in the audience who may not be aware, there's two Enochs. And so this is the one who creates the seven sciences um, that we understand as the seven liberal arts. It merges with the knowledge from the fallen angels or the gods and creates Enochian mysticism, which is the sun bull worshipping cult of the antediluvian epoch.
Yeah, and that gets us back to, the original subject of, these bloodlines, these bankers, because it appears that, because as I was reading your first book, you talk quite a bit about, these seven sciences, and it appears that these are clearly passed on through these various bloodlines into, I just call them the elites of the world, and of course it includes these banking families. That's how they learn how to how to do the things that they do with banking, keeping in keeping control, and they hide those from us, the reprobates.
Yeah, exactly. The mundane reprobates. Yes. And for people to understand it, there's a common class system that's been throughout our history. It's a four-class system. And if you go to First Nation reserves today, it's still in place. That bloodline chiefs, bloodline priests, They have the two lower classes. And so the two lower classes that humans populate would be, starting with the third class, would be a small entrepreneurial class. So they would be known as blacksmiths, bakers, tailors, things, essential services that the elite didn't want to, and elite is an interesting word, L-ites. Uh, like, anyways,
Yeah.
I digress. But and then the last class, the fourth class, is the slave and workforce and ritual supply class. And so the top two are governed by the people who run all the governments, or the royals and their larger families. So they control all of the oligarch companies,
Mm,
right? They control all the money. That's why they're called part of the great and mighty men in the book of Revelation. And they control the priest class all throughout history. They
right.
control the education class, the elite class,
Mm,
and they only educate their larger families throughout history. We only see a little bit of getting away from that in the last 150 years or so. And they're quickly trying to get rid of the middle class to get that back under control. And so they wrote the history. They developed the knowledge. They developed it all for their purposes, to keep us enslaved and to try and wipe us from the face of the earth. And had they had their way before the flood with that technology, we would have been destroyed by fire. And
okay.
at Babel, they had the opportunity to kill all of the Noahites in one location. And we get a reflection of that knowledge I was talking about, that acting as one language and one people, nothing they intended to do would be held back from them. That's how powerful the knowledge was that the Bible describes it as. So we need to understand that that class system is the way of the world. And so if we look at Christianity today, only again in the last 50 to 100 years would you have some of the last two classes rising in to become ministers. But before that, it was all royals,
Right.
right through to the black nobility bloodlines of of the popes in the Roman Church.
Wow. So I was going to ask about what's your guys' opinion on the Antichrist? Is it going to be like, are these families trying to like produce the Antichrist? These families, these hidden families that Gary was talking about, that Ed's talking about, or do you think what do you think about the Antichrist? Is it a physical human that Satan is going to inhabit? Is it like a seed? I know Satan's seed, mentioned in Genesis 3:15 or through 17. What's your guys' opinion on the Antichrist? Are the hidden families that we're talking about, these banking families or these black nobility, are they trying to produce maybe, intermingling with Satan, the Antichrist? What do you think? You can start,
I
Ed.
Yeah, I think there's a strong possibility because when you look at that the idea that this is a seed war, the original proclamation that God made against the Nachash, the serpent in the Garden of Eden, he said, put enmity between your seed and her seed. So there are two seeds, the seed of the woman being Jesus, and the seed of the serpent, the seed of the Nachash, I believe being the opposite Jesus. So I do believe that they are doing this through there's a reason they have these breeding programs. And I think that optimally, yes, I think they would absolutely want him to be that. Now, is he will he be a human being? I yes, because at least initially, because again, he's going to be a false Jesus. He is going to basically do the Jews. He's going to be accepted as a Jewish Messiah, or either him or the false prophet. You have to remember there's a duo. There's two of
Mhm.
them,
Yeah.
and the false prophet exercises all the same power of the Antichrist, the beast, in his presence. So at least one of them will be considered messianic to the orthodoxy. But I think that and here's my other little wild Ed Mabry theory, that when this head wound happens, because and I understand your question, is he a person or a system? Because
Mhm.
he seems to be talked about in both ways in the scriptures. And I think there will be a bit of both to him. But what I think that when this mortal head wound, I think that will be to this person, but I don't think it's going to. When it says he comes back from it, I think he actually dies. And because again, what was Jesus' signature move? Dying and coming back. Yeah, but he won't be resurrected because the Satan, the fallen angels, they don't have the power of life. that God does. I think, and this is my wild theory, I think he's going to be, I think he's going to be cloned. The reason I say that is because after he severs his head, we'll notice that the false prophet has worship directed to the image of the beast, not the beast. Why aren't they worshiping the beast anymore? Why are they worshiping the image? Well, the image is a replication. What is a replication of a human being? A clone.
Wow.
And I think that's when it will be inhabited by that's when they call them the beast from the bottomless pit. I believe that that entity will be inhabited by someone from the bottomless pit, possibly Nimrod, or maybe it's Nimrod's spirit, or he will be inhabited, or maybe Satan's spirit. I don't think it's going to be Satan because they're talked about as three separate entities: the dragon, the false prophet, and the beast. They seem to be separate. So that's why I know there's the one of the many commentators say that the Antichrist will be inhabited or indwelt by Satan. I don't see that in the scriptures. I think they'll be separate, and I think he will be inhabited by another entity. Some say he'll be inhabited by Leviathan, the primordial evil that you see in the book of Job, and that's alluded to in Genesis chapter 1. So that's my thought. I think in the second half, when he commits the abomination of desolation, I think that entity is going to be different um, in form and function. Um, the Antichrist of the first, I guess you could say 3.5 years of that 7-year period.
Mm.
So a lot of interesting things, and again, until we actually know, that's the thing. So we're all kind of speculating
Yep.
based on research and what we can sort of piece together. If it is like what was before, then we can look at Nebuchadnezzar, who had an image to worship. Obviously, the end time image is going to be way more advanced, somehow, some way. And it was also a giant statue as well. And Nebuchadnezzar was of the bloodlines. And so Alexander would be considered an Antichrist type figure. And that we know the Antichrist spirit has been with us ever since probably the beginning, certainly the time of Jesus, when in the epistles of John we're told about the spirit of the Antichrist. One might presume there might have been a antediluvian or before the flood Antichrist. Maybe it's Atlas, maybe it's Orion, maybe it's Sudras out of the Vedas, but there would have been one if it would be the same thing kind of repeating, and Nimrod is an archetypical Antichrist figure. And he began to be gibbery, Chalal, breaking his vow, sexual um, rituals, things like that, just as that's the same word in Genesis 6:4 um, when humans started, began to multiply on the earth. As you go into the Nephilim creation, that's the same word, chalal. There's a breaking of the vow and implication of all of these rituals that changes things that would allow for that. So it could be a descendant. That's part of it. It could be perhaps another Nephilim or Rephaim that is going to be doing it. Antichrist is called the son of perdition as well.
Mhm.
Son of, the punishment, son of the pit prison, basically. We know as when he's called the son of perdition, that in Revelation 17, as the one who once was, now is not, and comes up out of the pit prison. So whether it is a fallen angel or a demonic spirit, there's a relationship between these, and the understanding of son of perdition also might imply a bloodline. So who would be coming up out of the pit prison? And not to dismiss that Antichrist receives his power in 2 Thessalonians 2 from Satan. So you could imply maybe that's the avatar that is also there, or he just is somehow supplying it through other messengers. We're not told exactly how that all. And in Revelation 13, he receives his power from the dragon. Is that Satan the seraphim, or is that the seraphim Azazel? Or is that the beast empire as the Leviathan type creature that comes out of the sea? Or is it all of those as above? And so as we start to dig into this, Nimrod is a possibility. I mean, he could have gone as changing somehow that he was sent to the pit prison to uh, wait for that and will be the demonic spirit that will be part of the Antichrist. Now, the thing is we have to keep in mind that Antichrist doesn't stay dead if he dies. Well, he receives a mortal head wound. That implies he dies, but it's healed. That implies he lives again. Now, is that the same spirit? We don't know. But it could be that, or it could be multiple spirits, and it could be demonic, it could be Antichrist, and it could be an avatar as well. That's all because he's going to have great power and he's going to have the ability to go into heaven and bring down and trample on some of the starry host. This is going to be greater power than a giant. I mean, even in the Enoch Book of Giants, when Gilgamesh, the antediluvian Gilgamesh, versus the post-diluvian Gilgamesh, that's recorded in the Epic of Gilgamesh, who's created in the second incursion from the bull goddess Nin and Lugobanda, meaning giant king of Uruk, as the father. So he's named after the antediluvian Gilgamesh, would be the inference I would make. And he is so upset, the antediluvian Gilgamesh, after learning about the flood that's going to be coming, he's actually going to fight with some of the angels, but he doesn't throw them down. He doesn't win. So this is extraordinary power to a normal Nephilim, I think. So I think it's going to be obviously in human form. And I think it's going to be the Antichrist is going to be supplanted by demonic spiritual powers that are inhabiting him and healing him. I think if you look at that word perdition, it's part of the same group of words that produces Apollyon.
Okay.
And Apollo and a few other ones, but it's connected at least from the Greek perspective. So again, connecting it back to the pit, right? So, and I think the image is like an Old Testament teraphim, as some people pronounce it, and it's a talking idol.
Okay.
But I think when we look at these talking idols of the Old Testament, that's got to be and they're also talked about as family idols as well. And so it doesn't always is the word family idol and idol always doesn't go back to the words meaning idol. It goes back to teraphim as well. You'd have to take it back to the Hebrew to distinguishing between them. So if you have this inanimate object that can talk, that is like technology. And one wonders whether or not the demonic spirit can have an oikotarian created in technology, as with the AI and the interdimensional quantum mechanics, and the coming cryptocurrency that's going to fit in with that, but they have to backdoor it that you can't decode it from another dimension so that the royals would lose all their money. That can't happen. So they're still working on those types of things. But this image is, an image of the Antichrist, an idol of the Antichrist, but it's separate and it's distinct and it works for him. So he probably controls it. Is what would be my speculation on that. And when we understand the Antichrist as a beast, he is a beast spirit, right? He's from the beast kings. He's a beast emperor. So he's part of the beast, but there's also a beast system and a beast religion that he implements after he destroys Babylon. And there's the beast commerce system. So if you look at what Babylon has, you need to look at Babylon and the beast in those four compartments, just as Babylon is a city, it is a geopolitical organization, it is an economic organization and a trade organization and a religion. So we have to look at it that way, and it puts its system in place that Antichrist inherits.
Mhm. Let me ask you this, Gary. Do you think that going back to Babylon, there's a diversion of thought. Like, will Babylon itself, like the physical area in Iraq, be come back and be this great city, or is it just spiritual Babylon wherever the headquarters might be it Rome, London, New York,
Yeah.
or will it be, the actual
Yeah.
Babylon on the shores of
Yeah.
the Euphrates?
Well, in Zechariah 5, you have the woman in the basket
Hmm.
taken and put in Shinar or Babylon.
Right.
Now, that I would say would be a bit allegorical by the geography. I won't totally rule out Babylon in um, the old Babylon Empire, but it doesn't seem as likely to me based on the other details. And so Babylon in the New Testament and in Revelation is also defined as an allegory for the city of Rome. And
Right.
in
Yes.
Revelation 17, the woman is going to rest on seven hills.
Mhm.
And it's also seven kings, but it's separate and it's worded that the seven is representing both, and they're two different allegories to be understood. And that the seven hills of Romulus and Remus are the ancient seven hills of Rome
Mhm.
and understood by John as Babylon. And Peter even said he was writing from Rome, Babylon.
Right.
And the Essenes understood um, Rome as Babylon, and Babylon being the allegory, because if you said anything against Rome, they killed you. So
Right. Yeah.
you would speak in those types of Pesher codes, as they would call them.
Mhm.
And so I think you have to look for seven ancient hills. And Vaticanus Hill is not part of the seven, but it's a branch hill. It's an Etruscan hill from an Etruscan settlement the Vatican was built on. And it's a branch of Palatine Hill. Palatine Hill is home of the Sibylline prophecies, Sibylline prophets, and the same Sibylline and Phrygian religion that populated the Indo-Aryan, Scythian, Etruscan religions, and is definitely the old religion with the mother goddess coming back, which is important because it's actually considered a touch higher than the male patriarch god in Gnosticism and the secret societies.
Mhm.
And so I think that might be the goddess that perhaps, um, on one aspect of the understanding that Antichrist might worship in private, because it's the god of fortresses.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but it's not El or Elohim there for God. It's Eloah. It is the
Oh,
female.
female. Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Cool. Okay.
Now, that could be just the application of the power of fortresses. So
Mhm.
it's not totally clear. And then fortresses, Maoz, the Hebrew word, goes back to Azaz and as being mighty and strong. And of course, those are the root um, words for mighty, as in Azazel being, the mighty God, right? Or the mighty goat God, as you might take all of the different aspects of defining that you could link that back to Azazel. And why would he be honoring the God of fortresses? Because just as Azazel gave all the power of war before the flood to whatever Antichrist figure was there, he might be the one from the pit prison that is going to do that for Antichrist. So you could look at that both ways. So again, I don't know which is it's going to be, but maybe it's both the way it's done. So there's a connection there. So, um, but I do think we have to recognize the pit application. We have to recognize the extended power. We have to recognize it's a person that dies with a mortal head wound and is brought back to life somehow.
Mhm.
And we also have to recognize that it rises amongst the 10 kings as being from those bloodlines of the
Right.
giants. So it's going to be nuanced, and it's going to be probably things we haven't even thought of. But when we're being told about things on a grand scale of the greater meanings, as we link all of the passages together, we have to be disciplined not to ignore the inconvenient passages and try and weave all of the meanings in and still yet be prepared to be surprised.
It was
Wow.
like great advice.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up on 2 hours, so if you guys want to like try to interweave and wrap up whatever we talked about, I think that we went a lot of different places, and I think it was amazing amount of knowledge. And I'm glad we got into Revelation and end times because the audience on the Sunday service side that I do, They're a lot of them are conspiracy theorists that need to know this type of information to be prepared, you know. So I think they're I mean there's a lot of Christians there too, but I think there's some that are not Christian and they don't know what's coming. So I think this is vastly important, and I think it's amazing. I'm so happy that you guys got into this type of talk. It went from a conspiracy to Christianity, which I love, man. That's what I really is my passion, and I love how you guys interweaved all of it together. So if you guys have some way to like end it and kind of however you guys want to, maybe any last words, advice for the audience, whatever you'd like to do. I'll start with you, Ed, and then we'll go with
Yeah, sure.
Gary.
Yeah. We'll give Gary the last word. So I guess just taking it into the biggest picture, since we are you talk, it's the biggest conspiracy ever. I think it began with the antediluvian giants when these fallen angels came down and they married women. They didn't just have sex with them. It didn't say they fornicated. It said they married. It means they entered into some type of covenant with them. And in that covenant, in a marriage covenant in ancient times, there was gifts exchange. I think the gifts they gave, my opinion, the gifts are that knowledge, that hidden knowledge. And I think that hidden knowledge is where we got our first secret societies. When you get into the conspiracy world, that was the first time that we had that, and that knowledge has been passed on obviously throughout the centuries and millennia, and it's been guarded by the bloodlines, and by these priests. These mystics have kept it to themselves, and they've used it to amass great power. And I just say my big picture idea is what I talked about early on, is that their goal is to replace humanity with the fallen angels want to replace humanity with their offspring. We're God's offspring, their offspring of the Nephilim, and I think ultimately their goal is to replace us with them. And we've been going through their machinations for since the beginning of time, and it's going to wrap up in the events we see in the book of Revelation, when there's going to be just massive death and destruction. And the first part of it, I think, is going to be orchestrated by the bad guys, but then at the end, there will be the day of the Lord, when God says, "No, I'm pouring out my wrath. It's not intended for human beings. He God's wrath is intended for spiritual evil. But if you align yourself with spiritual evil, then you're going to find yourself in the crossfire, which is why it's important. My last word is to make sure you're on the right side."
Amen.
Yes, and a choice you have to make, and no choice is still a choice. So learn as much as you can and make your choice. Um, so when I look at trying to piece this sort of all together in terms of where we are and where we're going, is as we've talked about the bloodlines, and we talk about this intersection that's coming at the end of time. And we see that being forged today through the Committee of 300, in charge of all of these economic and trade organizations and banks, and the Davos crew. And the Davos crew in particularly is trying to make sure AI, cryptocurrency, quantum computing is all intermeshed for the system that they're looking to bring in, including the hive mind with that neuro interlink. And last January, they were talking about being able to communicate with a telepathic sort of capability, like a telepathic, like the old hive mind, within 10 years. And so we see them forming this global government with these 10 empires that the Club of Rome divided. The UN has a very similar separation into the world. And we see this oligarchic class that is rising throughout the world, where these super wealthy, low-level money people are rising, and there's a war against the middle class at the same time to get rid of a lot of the Western middle class. Now, as we sort of put that into our train of thought, they are politically moving with social masonry, just as they use that as a virus against some of the main bloodlines of the Western Europeans to take down. Would have been communism, a social masonry that took down the Putin and Romanov bloodline. You had the same virus put in to take down the Shah dynasty, XIA, that take their genealogies and ran the complete empires throughout the Chinese history that comes from the dragon creator gods, seraphim angels. Um, And you have that same virus that created National Socialism to take down communism because communism got out of control. Then the banking system had to fund the Allies to defeat National Socialism because it got out of control. But what we see now is an evolution from National Socialism to global socialism. It's National Socialism on a globalist scale. And so they want to drop the old linkages to Hitler and National Socialism and reinvent them as right wing, even though they were the National Socialist Workers' Party. I mean, and they developed a system of oligarchs that was funded by the banks that was going to run the 1,000-year millennium of the Third Reich. And they had a universal Reichschurch religion that they were wanting to supplant on the world as if they were successful. So as we understand this is look for that system, National Socialism on a globalist scale, to be the MO and the organizational structure that they want to have for the end time. And it's being pieced together, and it's going to come together through catastrophes that they're going to create and predict. And they're going to cattle herd people from polar opposites to move into that direction. So you might imagine white hats and black hats, as they like to call it, white magic and black magic, good giants and evil giants, and so on and so forth. That's their micro versus their macro dualism. And it's designed to cattle herd people from poles apart positions into the direction that they want. So an example of that. And I don't know where Elon fits at this point in time, but I'll use him as an example. He was talking about the evil AI that Google was creating. So Elon's solution, and I like Elon a lot for what he's doing, but I always watch the rich and the powerful like a hawk. And his solution to Google was, I'm going to create my own AI company and make good AI. There is no such thing as good AI. It's existential threat to us. So that's the type of things that sort of happen, and it has the same ends. And whether they call them white hats who have humankind's interest at better heart versus the dark hats, which just want to get rid of us quickly, um, they worship the same pantheon of gods and have the same goal. So we're just pawns in that whole sort of movement if we don't, you know, understand what they're doing to us. And this is going to funnel in with these wars and rumors of wars and catastrophes that are going to make the way for the false prophets. And this whole system with the bloodlines is going to funnel into the 10 kings. That's going to create the Babylon system in those 4 components, then funnel into the Antichrist, because there can only be one. And he's actually going to overthrow 3. And he's going to behead everybody because he's going to make sure all the ones who don't swear loyalty to him in an oath are going to have their heads chopped off, and they want to make sure they stay dead because that's their belief system. And it's going to include humans as well. That'll be just sort of the collateral damage that is going to funnel into the beast system. So we have these parallel technologies and organizations that are starting to move in a direction to a nexus point, and we can't get caught getting ahead of ourselves on some of the technologies and these nexus points, where otherwise we're going to lose our credibility. We just have to continue to point the direction.
Yes, there we go. So, awesome words of advice, and as always, on we want to lead you guys to Christ. That's the whole entire purpose. Okay, so we have, like you said, the black hats, the white hats. I know that there's us conspiracy minded people are searching for the truth, and we know that at the end of the rabbit holes, you guys are left with nothing. That's why we're trying to show you the real truth, the way, the truth, the life, Jesus Christ. We're trying to lead you to being on God's side. You know that God wins in the end. All these terrible things that you might hear on the news, all these terrible things happening that are going behind the scenes. We know that God is in control, and you can only worship one master. So if you're not worshiping God, you are worshiping Satan, even if you're not in a Satan's, sitting in his temple. You're not, if you're not worshiping God, you're worshiping Satan. So literally what we're trying to do is just bring you there. So now, Ed, can you shout
Yes.
out your website for them? It's
Yeah.
is it faithbyreason.net, I think, right?
Yes, .net. Yeah, not .com. Yeah, that's someone else who won't sell me their website. So
Okay,
unfortunately,
okay.
I'm stuck with faithbyreason.net. Also on YouTube, my videos are there. Did my Revelation series 60 videos. I just started a Genesis series. I think my next one will be up in the next couple days on that. And so yeah, Twitter as well. X, I think. Yeah, Twitter X. I'm on there as well. But yeah, my website faithbyreason.net is the best way to find all my videos, my blogs, my podcasts are there. So thank you.
Perfect. And then Gary, can you shout out your YouTube and how they can get a hold of you if they need to ask you questions?
So you'll see many YouTube channels out there with my name. I do not have one.
Okay.
Um, so the best way to get a hold of me is either through Facebook under Gary Wayne, to go to Messenger or onto my timeline, or to go to my website, Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's the number 6conspiracy.com. I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of book one, all 84 chapters of book two. On the media page, I have some shows on there, as I was mentioning probably earlier, 15 shows for the two books on each section, and then one that's kind of an overview and a video on book one from the Now You See TV people that I think was done really good. And it was my first video that I had done. So I have a warm spot and I left that one up. And on my website, you can get a signed copy of my book if you want it. And it's the best place and the quickest place to get my books. So you go to the buy now, you go to book one, buy one, or buy, or book two, buy. And if you want to buy one book, you can buy one book, and you can email me with if you have a custom signature on it if you want. If not, I'll do my own. There's room there to put on who you want it signed to. And the more books you buy, the larger the discount. I just pass on the freight savings for the shipping, and it starts at $5 a book and goes as high as $10 a book, depending on how many books you're buying. I just put up a bundling page on book three, so you can buy book one and two and pick the quantity that you want and get the discount on it. And then I've got an email linked to me off of there to give me the names, and if there's any special signings that you want on it. You can link over from my website to Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, and BarnesandNoble.com. So if you want to buy from them, that's available from them and other bookstores. You can also link over from the website to Amazon for the Kindle edition of both books, and it takes you right to that page. I will have links up as soon as book two audio is up. And if you live in the US, you wanted a signed copy, you go to the US page. If you live in Canada, you go to the Canada page. If you live anywhere else in the world, you go to the international page. So I ship all over the world for the books. And yeah, so the website has a new look. And if you want to contact me and get some more information or ask a question, go to contact the author. I will tell you this, I've been so busy with the audios and the new book this year. I am now 3 months behind on emails. Bear with me. I will get back to you. I do them in order.
All right, thank you. And as we always do, guys, we end this in prayer. So let's do that. So, Father God, in the name of Jesus, we appreciate everything you do for us. Thank you so much for a clear connection. Thank you so much for introducing me to Ed and Gary. What an amazing show that we had here, Lord. We appreciate that so much. And I just want to ask that you, anybody that's out there right now listening, that they're hearing all these conspiracies and they might have fear in their hearts, and we know that that you win in the end, Lord. So we know that we talked about Revelation and some of your scriptures that are with the Antichrist and some of this evil, but we know, Lord, that you have us, and if you can help these people that are listening to understand the prophecies as much as possible, help Ed and help Gary when they're teaching Revelation, or if they're teaching Genesis or anything out of the Bible, just help them to teach it clearly and with the best knowledge that they could do, so we appreciate everything you do for us, Lord, and thank you so much. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
So everybody that's listening, if you go to my YouTube, it's Josh Monday Music and Podcast. We're coming up on almost 5,000 subscribers. I really appreciate everybody that subscribes, and also subscribe to Ed's page and check out his website and check out Gary Wayne's book. So thank you guys so much for listening, and God bless you.